Awesome. Okay, we are now recording. Once again, welcome. The recording has officially started and the consent statement I read is now in the chat box. My name is Jenny Benson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm speaking to you today from Olympia, Washington on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. I'm joined by my colleagues, Micaiah Guy, Mary Van Verst, and Thomas Darnell. Mary and I are part of the program officer team here at Serve Washington. Thomas is our fiscal grants officer, and Micaiah is our director of equity and grants. And all of us will be here to support this call today and answer any questions that you might have. We sincerely appreciate your interest in AmeriCorps funding and exploring the ways that you can leverage national service to meet and address local needs. We have 5 objectives that we would like to tackle today during this technical assistance training. We want to first provide an overview and the purpose of AmeriCorps state funding. We want to explain who is eligible to apply. We want to outline the process and timeline for applying for this funding. And we want to review key highlights to this year's application and offer helpful hints and tips. And lastly, and probably most importantly, answer any questions that you may have of us. And to kick it off for some of the brand new names and brand new faces I'm seeing, just to kick us off with a question of what is AmeriCorps?
Questions about AmeriCorps? Well, you've come to the right place because we're here to help. First off, let's clear up one thing right away. You might be wondering how to say or spell AmeriCorps. Sometimes people pronounce the P, but don't make that same mistake. AmeriCorps is alive and well. Just spelled. Questions about AmeriCorps?
Oops.
Well, you've come to the right place because we're here to help. First off, let's clear up one thing right away. You might be wondering how to say or spell AmeriCorps. Sometimes people pronounce the P, but don't make that same mistake. AmeriCorps is alive and well, just spelled with a silent P. So think of Apple Corps or core of the earth. Now that we have that clear, what exactly is AmeriCorps anyways? AmeriCorps is simply Americans of all ages and backgrounds dedicating their time and skills to get things done. There we go. So how does AmeriCorps get things done? More than 80,000 Americans across the country join AmeriCorps each year, and all of them are tackling different problems in different ways. For example, AmeriCorps members help families attain affordable homes. They mentor students so that they stay in school. Perhaps there is a tornado, a flood, a forest fire, or a hurricane. AmeriCorps members also help communities recover from disasters. There's so many more things that AmeriCorps members do, but if we said it all, we'd be here all day. Why do we call them members, you ask? AmeriCorps members spend anywhere from 3 months to a year dedicating their time and skills to serve. They can volunteer with nonprofits, schools, public agencies, and community and faith-based organizations. And in case you were wondering, there are a few perks AmeriCorps members get, including money to pay for college, student loan deferment, training, living allowance, health benefits, and job opportunities with leading employers. Not too bad, right? All right. What's the purpose of AmeriCorps? Like the military or the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps is a way to serve your country. AmeriCorps members make Americans safer, stronger, and healthier, and they strengthen our communities. But above all, AmeriCorps members get things done. That's it. That's what AmeriCorps is. Learn more about AmeriCorps at AmeriCorps.gov.
Thanks for bearing with me with that. I just think that video is such a great encapsulation and short description of what AmeriCorps is. And I do want to draw attention and note that that video was created a few years ago before there was a national logo change. And so that was our legacy logo. Little bit confusing time right now as we're transitioning from one logo to another. That was the old logo. To talk about service specific to Washington State, we have 700 different service sites in our state. In the last year, there were 5,300 AmeriCorps Senior and AmeriCorps State, National, and Vista members. And in Washington State, we also have seen about $35.2 million AmeriCorps dollars in AmeriCorps and local funding to support these national service programs in our state. And then $180.6 million have been earned in AmeriCorps Education Awards since 1994. So the purpose of AmeriCorps funding. AmeriCorps brings people together to tackle some of the country's most pressing challenges through national service and volunteering. AmeriCorps members and volunteers serve with organizations dedicated to the improvement of communities. AmeriCorps helps make service a cornerstone of our national culture. To achieve this end, AmeriCorps funding is available to eligible organizations that propose to engage AmeriCorps members in evidence-informed and evidence-based interventions to strengthen communities. State service commissions like Serve Washington receive AmeriCorps state funding from the federal agency, AmeriCorps. They were previously known as the Corporation for National Community Service, or CNCS. So if you hear that, it means AmeriCorps, the agency. Serve Washington then passes this funding through to local programs. AmeriCorps funds are funneled through state commissions by way of two different funding streams. One is the AmeriCorps competitive funding, and that's a process that happens in each fall. And the second is AmeriCorps state formula funding, and that's this current process that we're talking about. It occurs each spring. For the competitive process in the fall, funding is awarded by AmeriCorps and applicants must compete at the national level. That competition is a better fit for larger programs, programs that meet national priorities, and programs with a moderate to strong evidence base. For the formula process, that's this one, funds are awarded to programs by Serve Washington directly, and the competition is only within Washington State. For this grant opportunity, Serve Washington projects approximately $4 million to be available to award out, with a large portion of that already dedicated to continuation grantees. This formula competition is a good fit for smaller programs. That's 10 to 35 MSYs, member service years, programs that meet local priorities, programs that propose to operate in newly established single or multiple focus areas, and programs that are still building that evidence base. We bring this to your attention so that you can determine if that competitive competition is a better fit. And Serve Washington projects the next competitive competition to occur in the fall later on this year. Now, if you're not ready to launch into an operational grant with AmeriCorps members in service, but are still very interested in AmeriCorps, a better fit might be a planning grant. We do have a planning grant competition now, open now, and you can find that on our website, and there will be a technical assistance call for planning grants tomorrow. Overall, the focus of AmeriCorps funding is guided by the Serve America Act. In April of 2009, the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act was signed into law by President Obama. Through this law, Congress directed AmeriCorps, the federal agency, to focus national service in 6 areas where service can make an impact: disaster services, economic opportunity, education, environmental stewardship, healthy futures, and veterans and military families. These historic areas of focus have been well funded in the past, but applicants may apply for funding under any focus area that proposes to use AmeriCorps members in evidence-informed or evidence-based interventions to strengthen communities. Priority funding areas are determined annually by AmeriCorps and change quite frequently. So this year's funding policies are, their funding priorities, are organizations leading service in communities with concentrated poverty, rural communities, tribal communities, and those organizations serving historically underrepresented and underserved individuals, including but not limited to communities of color, immigrants and refugees, people with disabilities, people who identify as part of the LGBTQIA+ community, people with arrest and/or conviction records, and religious minorities. Evidence-based interventions on the AmeriCorps evidence exchange that are assessed as having moderate or strong evidence. Please note that many of these interventions have demonstrated effectiveness in improving outcomes for individuals living in underserved communities, and the agency has committed resources to supporting grantees seeking to replicate and evaluate these interventions in similar community. Then there's veterans and military families. It's caregivers and survivors. It's a program model that improves the quality of life for veterans and improves the well-being of military and veteran families, caregivers, and survivors. Faith-based organizations. Programs that provide additional benefits to AmeriCorps members aimed at enhancing member experience and bolstering member recruitment and retention, such as paying more than the minimum living allowance, providing transportation, housing, or food assistance. Those are things that are included in the criteria around that member experience. Similarly, programs that are creating workforce pathways for the AmeriCorps members, including deliberate training, certifications, and hiring preferences or support. Also, environmental stewardship, including supporting communities to become more resilient through measures that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, conserve land and water, increase renewable energy use, and improve at-risk ecosystems, especially in underserved households and communities, and an economic mobility core. Use the RFGA and supplemental guidance to see the specifics more. If your application fits one of these priorities, you will have the opportunity to identify that in the grant application narrative. This portion of the narrative is not scored, but it does allow for funding priority in some cases. If your application doesn't fit, don't worry. Many applications are funded each year outside of those priority areas. Don't try to conform your application or program design unnecessarily, as we see this resulting in mission drift and a very difficult read for the reviewers. Essentially, you either fit or you don't. There's no need to waste valuable narrative space if you don't fit. Just simply put NA, not applicable. So those were funding priorities determined at the federal level. But then there are priority funding areas as determined by Serve Washington at our state level. Those include strategies that are driven by community identified priorities, organizations that are led and staffed by people that reflect communities being served, programs that strive to recruit and select national service members that reflect the communities being served, models that utilize service as a strategy to develop career pathways, address the housing crisis, support child wellness, and tackle climate change. And then replication of proven models that support a locally identified need, and models that engage adults 55 years and older. Serve Washington seeks to encourage resources that are available to tribes, rural and other underrepresented communities, and results in a geographically diverse portfolio of programs. So let's pivot a moment and talk about AmeriCorps members. So AmeriCorps members must spend a majority of their time participating in direct service activities. Direct service addresses human need or needs of the environment in one form or another. It is engaging directly with the people to support change or performing service that is involved in creating a community impact. Administrative tasks necessary to perform direct service are inherent. However, programs should caution against excessive administrative tasks or tasks that are unrelated to that direct service. Indirect is defined as training and fundraising and is allowable, but should be limited. The most important piece of information to relay is that at least 70% of the member's time must be doing a direct service. A maximum of 20% of their time can be dedicated to training, and a maximum of 10% of each member's time can be dedicated to fundraising. If you are looking for a capacity building position as opposed to the direct service, you may want to research AmeriCorps Vista. And another caution, AmeriCorps is not intended to duplicate activities already available in the locality of the program. Organizations may not displace or supplant an employee or volunteer position or duties with an AmeriCorps position. And then please remember, AmeriCorps members serve or perform service. They're defined as law, or they're defined by law as participants in an approved national service position. AmeriCorps members are not employees of the organization or the government, and entities should refrain from language such as work or job when describing service of the members. Now, to talk about eligible applicants. Up front, I want to draw your attention to the requirement for a minimum number of member service years, or MSYs. This is a standard of Serve Washington. An MSY is equivalent to one 1,700-hour full-time position. It's kind of like one FTE in the employee-employer world. Serve Washington will be funding applications that request between 10 and 35 MSY. This can be a combination of full-time or less than full-time MSYs. Organizations interested in less than 10, which would be a small team or an individual placement, can consult with our RFGA for other resources, including a waiver process for this requirement. Organizations interested in more than 35 MSYs should compete in the fall competitive process, which has no maximum placed on the requested number of member service years. Then, provided that your organization meets the 10 to 35 member service year requirement, the following entities are eligible to apply: nonprofit organizations, institutions of higher education, state and local government, and tribal governments. Organizations must also have a UEI number, that's a unique entity identifier that has replaced the DUNS number, if you're more familiar with that. The UEI is the new one everybody needs to have, as well as an EIN, an employer identification number, and must be registered in the SAM, which is the US government's system for awards management. Lots of acronyms there. If those acronyms are new to you, please refer to the RFGA documents for additional information. Then finally, to be eligible, the project award period, which is a full year, must begin no earlier than August 1st of 2023 and no later than January 1st of 2024. Those dates are also referenced in the RFGA. I'm a visual learner, so having it the process mapped out like this is really helpful for me, and I hope it's helpful for some of the people on the call today as well. After this call, you'll go back, start diligently working on a grant application, and then you'll submit the application in the online award management or grants management system called eGrants. Serve Washington Commission will review those and vote. Serve Washington will then conduct some clarification, reach out to applicants, and ask questions and get some clarification if they're selected. Then that gets submitted to AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps reviews, and if AmeriCorps agrees with our assessment, there may be some clarification at that time. Then awards are made, and you get a program and an AmeriCorps member to help your organization and your community. So what's the timeline look like for this? There's more on the process and timeline in the RFGA, but a couple dates I really want to bring your attention to is March 17th is when the applications are due from applicants. They are due by 5:00 p.m. So please pay attention to the date and time, March 17th by 5 p.m. Like I said, Serve Washington staff and commissioners will begin reviewing those, and we will have our grant review committee meeting on April 21st. On this day, it's possible that our commissioners, our grant review committee, may have some questions or pieces they need clarified from applicants in order to make their determination. And so we ask applicants to be available by phone that day in the event that the grant review committee needs additional information. We will then go into a clarification period, and the official Serve Washington Commission meeting will be on May 11th. And at that time is when the full commission votes on the grant review committee's recommendation. You should expect to hear from us around or no later than May 17th to find out the status of your award. And then AmeriCorps, the agency, will release the award no later than July 25th. there's a lot of special lingo and jargon that I'm throwing around at you. So I just want to start by defining some of the key terms that you have already heard or will hear as we move further along in this training today. So some key terms. If you're familiar with AmeriCorps, you may be familiar with the federal NOFO. The NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunity, is the federal opportunity by way in which applicants apply directly to the national competition in the fall. The RFGA, or Request for Grant Application, is Serve Washington's notice to apply. You will see on the front page of the formula RFGA a notice that informs applicants. We use an abridged version of that NOFO, meaning it's very similar, but we've eliminated some portions that don't apply to the local state competition. So make sure that you're using our RFGA for this competition. We already addressed the difference between competitive and formula grant opportunities, but as a refresher, competitive competes nationally every fall, and formula opportunity, which is this grant competition, competes at the state level every spring. You're also going to hear the terms cost reimbursement and fixed amount. These are the two types of financial arrangements for your grant agreement. All new applicants must apply under the cost reimbursement model. This model has a detailed line item budget with a required percentage of match that must be documented. It looks like most standard grant application budgets. The fixed amount model is a bit different. You must have permission to apply as a fixed amount grant. And those grants are reimbursed based on a monthly flat rate, which is tied to the number of members actually in service. Fixed amount grants do not have a required match and do not report on match, but still must provide program income to operate successfully. While there can be benefits to a fixed amount model, it does require a lot of autonomy and therefore has to be an earned status. Lastly, you will hear terms such as new grantee, recompete grantee, or continuation grantee. New grantees are just that, brand new to AmeriCorps funding or AmeriCorps operational funding. Recompetes are those applicants who have finished a 3-year grant cycle and are looking for a new 3-year grant cycle. And then continuations are those currently funded that are entering into year 2 or year 3 of their 3-year cycle. Continuations, if in good standing, do have priority funding, while new and recompete grantees will compete head to head. Okay, now to get into some of the meat of the RFGA. The goal today is not to simply regurgitate the RFGA to you. We do, however, want to provide a brief explanation of some of the requirements. Page limits. Applications may not exceed 10 pages, or in rare cases, 12 pages if you are a rural intermediary organization program. These pages the page limits apply to one face sheet, the first page of the application, which is automatically populated in the grants management system. The narrative sections titled A, Executive Summary, B, Program Design, C, Organizational Capacity. So then what doesn't count? A lot. The evaluation plan and report, the logic model, the actual budget, the performance measure modules and supplemental documents. Those are all required, but don't count in that 10-page limit. A note about narratives. The narratives have changed a bit from previous opportunities. There is a total of 7 criteria to respond to, 3 under program design and 4 under organizational capacity. Be sure to reference the RFGA for all narrative sections. This funding requires a cost share. First-time cost reimbursement applicants are required to provide a cost match of 24% each year for the first 3-year funding period. That match increases in future funding years up to 50% during year 10 if awarded. We would like to note that a 24% match may or may not be enough to operate. While the federal share can be upwards of $23,000 per MSY, successful programs have reported an overall cost per MSY of $25,000 to $35,000, depending on your program design. So there is substantial cash and in-kind needed to operate a successful AmeriCorps program. This year, the maximum cost per MSY, which is the amount you can ask from the feds, is $23,000 for most applicants. There are some special criteria that may allow some applicants to ask for more. So be sure to read the RFGA very carefully. Now, before you get too excited about the federal share, want to draw your attention to the cost side of that equation. The minimum living allowance this year, oh, I missed an update. Oh, my apologies. This slide is incorrect. The minimum living allowance for this year is $17,600 for full-time members. That does not leave a lot of federal dollars to operate. These awards are intended to be a public-private partnership. The federal government has never been the sole funder. Criminal history checks, CHCs. Don't forget to budget for these. AmeriCorps federal statute requires very specific guidance in the area of criminal history checks. The statute is most likely different from a standard organization policy, and you must adhere to the statute. In short, every staff and AmeriCorps member must receive a check on the National Sex Offender Public website, the NSOPW, a state of service check known as the watch check, and a state of residence check if they are applying from outside the state of Washington, and an FBI fingerprint check. Each of these checks must be completed and reviewed, which is what we call adjudicated, and have that all documented before a staff member can begin working on the grant, or an AmeriCorps member can start counting hours towards that. Thank you to my colleague for putting the reminder of the correct minimum living allowance amount in the chat box. We have provided what we believe is an approximate cost for these checks when using the AmeriCorps resources to complete such checks. It's about $68 within the state of Washington. That covers the NSOPW, the watch check, the FBI check, and it does not, however, take into consideration costs for the out-of-state checks if the staff or member is applying from outside of Washington. Again, these are projected costs for using the AmeriCorps vendor, but are required, so factor them in. Prohibited and unallowable activities. By law, there are a number of activities not allowed, such as attempting to influence legislation, engaging in religious instruction, providing direct benefit to a for-profit business, providing abortion services, duplicated services, displacing paid workers, and much more. If you're a new applicant, please consult the supplemental guidance for the full definition and the full list of prohibited activities so that you're not inadvertently proposing a program model with those prohibited activities. And then performance measures. All applicants should carefully review the performance measure instructions. Only opt in to national performance measures if they're truly reflective of your program design. Applicant measures are allowable. One aligned measure is required, an aligned measure is one output and associated outcome. And Serve Washington and AmeriCorps both value the quality of performance measures over the quantity of measures. So we're going to get more into performance measures here in a little bit. But first, we're going to discuss some budget tips. And I'm going to invite our amazing fiscal grants officer to share some of his words of wisdom. Thomas?
Thanks, Jenny. So as you're developing your budget, we've outlined your required travel. So these are things that we're going to need to see them in the budget in order to approve your budget and approve your application. So we have a 2-day meeting annually in July, which will be somewhere in the Olympia area for all of our state subgrantees. This has recently been a virtual event, but we're really pushing hard to have it be an in-person event. So make sure that that ends up in your budget. Then we also have a full-week regional training held somewhere in the Pacific region. In the past, it's been Portland, Oregon, Salt Lake City, Utah, Reno, Nevada, and Albuquerque, New Mexico, and also San Diego. This conference is for subgrantees operating in the Western US and territories. We don't know where the next conference will be held, so we'd say to budget for Los Angeles, California as a price point. We have a couple of optional opportunities. The LFNSE for staff and leader corps for members. You can find these referenced in the RFGA. See, if you are going to apply under the cost reimbursement financial agreement, those applications require submission of a comprehensive budget. Budget worksheet for operational grants can be found on the ServeWA website. Some important tips to keep in mind as you're developing your budget. As you complete the budget narrative, be sure to fully explain the calculations used for each amount and ensure the calculation is equal to what is put in the associated line item. For example, in the narrative for the required travel I mentioned a second ago, a line item would state travel to meeting X is $1,186, then use the narrative field to show how you came up with that $1,186. So as you see on the slide, you would break that up into the different amounts. So while we understand that, these are estimates, they still need to be pretty specific estimates. And any cost that you can be pretty sure of, you should get down to the dollar. And then be sure to itemize fringe benefits and salary, and figure it out per person, per role, not a lump sum for each category. So, list each for the personnel section, list each person who is going to be compensated on this grant by spending time on this program, and do the same for fringe benefits. And you can go to the next slide, Jenny. All right, so you're probably not looking directly at the budget right now, but we have section 1, section 2, and section 3. Section 1 is like general operating things, which is going to include staff pay. It's going to include travel, like the expenses I mentioned before. It's going to include training and other things. Section 2 is going to be direct member costs, which is going to be living allowance, FICA, member health insurance, that kind of thing. Section 3 is your indirect rate. So if you change a line item in the top 2 sections, make sure you recalculate your indirect rate to get a new number. Now, indirect cost rate, do you have a federally approved indirect cost rate? Then it's pretty simple, you can just use it. Let's see. We also, so there are other options if you don't have an indirect cost rate. So reach out and ask if you have questions about that. Also, don't forget the source of funds section. It's really common. We see it a lot where applicants don't fill that out and we have to send it back. That's a matter of you're proposing a certain percentage of match, as Jenny talked about earlier, 24% for new programs. So, we need to see where those funds are coming from. So, maybe it's your program's general fund, maybe it's another, like a foundation grant that you secured to support this program. Whatever it is, just list your source of funds in the budget application. And we can go to the next page. All right, so like I said, that section 2 is member support costs. Required member costs include living allowance, FICA, and in Washington, you do have to do workers' compensation. Some payroll departments will get confused on the difference between employees and AmeriCorps members. Please remember, AmeriCorps members are not employees. Thus, there are a few key employee deductions that do not apply to members. Do not budget for unemployment, paid family medical leave premiums, or the most recent WA CARES Act long-term care premiums. AmeriCorps members are not eligible for these state programs and therefore should not pay these traditional employee taxes. And final note that applies to all grants, the source of funds section is an explanation of additional funds used. This total should match the total that you put under other revenue in the demographics section. Just a couple other things on the budget. I always I think with the philosophy that your budget is kind of a roadmap for getting through the year. So, try to make sure your program is reflected in your budget. Don't just fill out, whatever that gets it done and work it out later. So it's definitely a good idea to have both fiscal people and program people kind of work on it together, because fiscal people aren't going to understand all the programmatic needs that need to go in the budget, and program people a lot of times don't understand some of the tricky fiscal realities of the organization's funding structure. So when you can collaborate on that and consider everything, you're going to get a better result. And I would also say one thing that I don't say here, just consider that, you know, we've had programs that have struggled to have full enrollment, and you're proposing to have a certain match percentage, which means you'll have a certain federal percentage paying for your program. And for example, if you don't manage to get full enrollment and all of your grant was going to cover member living allowance, then you're not going to be drawing your grant and you'll be matching at a really high rate. And then the opposite would be true if you were to use federal funds to entirely fund operations and use organizational match to cover living allowance. You're going to end up in a situation where you're unable to make match, right? So consider having some kind of balance in your budget in case you have enrollment or retention issues. Hopefully you don't, but we've seen a lot of that lately. And I think that's all I have, Jenny.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Thomas. We're really excited to be able to announce 2 special funding opportunities within this RFGA. One is in the area of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and the other related to an evaluation opportunity with dialogues in action. Please refer to the RFGA for further details or for full details. So first, want to say that this opportunity is only for fiscal year 2023, which is program year 23-24, and is contingent upon federal funds. There is no expectation or pressure to request these funds. This funding is optional. The first opportunity is proposals. Serve Washington is looking for proposals and programs to tell us how funds could be used to support anti-racist and social justice work in the AmeriCorps program. It could look like staff or member training. It could look like consultant work. It could look like work to support enrollment or retention, or you tell us. We anticipate being able to award between $1,000 to $10,000 per program from this opportunity. Opportunity 2, the second one, is funding to participate in Project Impact. Project Impact is a 6 to 8 month cohort-based course in evaluation, design, implementation, and innovation. This is done by dialogues in action, and you learn about evaluation while you go through and complete an evaluation on an aspect of your program. We anticipate being able to award 8 programs, $5,000 to participate in this special opportunity. Also, how do you apply for it? I'm sure that's what everybody's thinking. The eGrants application doesn't support a ton of alterations or room for us to do things like this. So we're asking you to apply for either special opportunity by including a description and cost request in the clarification section of the application. Most of the time, you wouldn't touch the clarification at this point in time. But for this special opportunity, that's where we're going to ask you to put that. A maximum of 1 page. in that section is to, if you would like to apply for these special opportunities and how you would use those funds. With these opportunities, there will be a budgetary impact affecting the overall cost per MSY. And I'd like to show an example to aid in some understanding around that. When first determining the overall operational budget, the program cannot exceed the maximum cost per MSY that's noted in the RFGA as applicable to your application type. Then the program can add this one-time additional line item cost, which is going to recalculate your cost per MSY. So the example on this slide, if you are requesting 20 full-time slots, which would be 20 MSY, and asking for the maximum cost of $23,000, that would be a total of $460,000 that you can request. But then if you add on that special funding to the base request, say the $5,000 for that project impact, that brings you up to a total ask of $465,000. If you divide that by the 20 MSY, you see that the new cost per MSY is going to be $23,250. The new cost per MSY may appear over the limit. The funds are going to be commingled in the AmeriCorps award, and the funds must adhere to all of the rules, regulation, and drawdown procedures as the rest of the award. Okay. Finally, I want to draw your attention to the weighing of the application. And note that the application itself contains 4 major categories, each worth a different percentage that reviewers will use to grade the application's merit. So the first is that executive summary. It's required, but it's not scored. It's worth 0%. The program design is worth 50% of the application's weight. Organizational capacity is 25. And then the cost effectiveness and budget adequacy is worth another 25. A note for recompetes, the narrative questions have slightly changed, so please pay attention to the criteria. Do not just copy and paste your last application or rely on the previous application headings. Because the program design section of the application is worth the most points, we felt it would be worthwhile to spend some time discussing it today. So I'm about to give an overview of the AmeriCorps definition of theory of change and discuss requirements for evidence. Okay. So taking this opportunity to highlight a broader topic, AmeriCorps' definition of theory of change. A theory of change has 3 basic elements: the problem need statement, the evidence-based intervention, and the intended outcome. An aligned theory of change has an assumed cause and effect relationship. Let's talk a little bit about each element. The problem is the negative condition that exists in the service area proposed, while the need explains the scope, significance, and cause of the problem. The problem need statement answers questions such as who's affected, how many, and how severe. It also answers the question, so what? What will likely happen if nothing is done? And finally, why does it exist and how is it perpetuated? The problem need statement should also reflect statistics and data sources that are reputable, current, and local. A word of caution, lengthy problem statements that outline every possible negative condition in a service area, even when irrelevant to the proposed intervention and outcome, is not the direction you should go in this section. We encourage applicants to consider how you might apply an equity lens when writing the theory of change. In general, how you are describing the problem, but also specifically related to answering the question of cause when we are describing the community problem statement we want to address. On the screen, we have a quote from the Equity Language Guide from the Governor's Interagency Council on Health Disparities, which was approved in December of 2018. This is in here because it's an invitation for you to be explicit in your narrative about why the problem you're addressing exists in the first place. State data have consistently pointed out differences in access and outcomes experienced by people of color. Examples include gaps in kindergarten readiness, disproportionality in the criminal justice system, disproportionate exposure to environmental hazards, and health inequities. When documenting these inequities, agencies have historically used language that explicitly states or implies that race or ethnicity is a risk factor. And then the council's guidance to agencies is to be explicit about racism and other forms of oppression as the underlying cause for the inequities that exist and show up in government data. Such inequities may be due to overt interpersonal racism or institutional racism that results in policies or processes having disparate and adverse impacts on people of color. So when sharing information on outcomes by race or ethnicity, include context about underlying reasons, including lack of opportunity, policies that have had a disparate impact on people of color, effects of implicit bias on subjective decision-making, toxic stress, etc. And also be sure to include why it is relevant to your program. You don't want this to become a data dump. You might want to reference a recorded training that was done in the July 2020 subgrantee meeting, which is posted on our website under the subgrantee resources and meeting material. It addressed this equity lens in searching for statistics a little bit more. The intervention piece of the theory of change is a set of activities that will produce the intended outcome. It is important to clearly define each aspect of the intervention. Do not assume the reader understands your intentions, especially when using general interventions such as tutoring or mentoring, for example. Design and dosage, which should include frequency, intensity, and duration of your intervention, should be well defined. Who does what with whom, how often, how many times, and for what proposed length of time. The word of caution here is want to caution against interventions defined in general terms, but without detail or support of evidence. We do have a slide on evidence Micaiah, did you want to talk about this slide, or do you want me to just move to the next one?
I can jump in here so that we can kind of keep it rolling. When you are looking at this RFGA, you will notice that evidence is actually not listed. And that is because we have decided to kind of come at it from a different angle. What we're really looking for in these applications is your stakeholder and your community engagement. And so in addition to whatever literature reviews you have or any data gathering that you did that lets you know, yes, this is, you know, the intervention we want to do, we also want to know, who did you talk to? Who did you include in gathering this information? We're looking for, you know, how often did you meet with them? Did you develop work groups? Did you, you know, have, you know, special meetings? Did you go out into the community? What was your targeted demographic for doing this research? As Jenny said, we want you to be explicit and we want it to be real. And so instead of, you know, all of the evidence, and as Jenny said, a data dump, we really want that narrative of, this is what we did that let us know that this is what needs to be done, or this is what this particular community needs because this is what they told us. And then there's more detail in the RFGA, but that's pretty much like the long and short of it.
Thanks, Micaiah. Okay. Then the intended outcome is simply the change you hope to see. The caution with this one, that the caution away from outcomes that are likely too difficult to measure or don't align with the proposed intervention and need. And the theory of change connects to your logic model. So to talk about this a little bit more. A logic model is a snapshot of the program's theory of change. Reminder to keep the logic model, 3 pages maximum. Use bullet points and/or short phrases rather than full sentences. When read left to right, the logic model should answer the question, if then. So if we have 20 AmeriCorps members, then 400 students will receive services, and on through this chart. Then when read backwards, right to left, it answers the question, but how? 400 students need services requiring 20 AmeriCorps members. The logic model also encompasses short, medium, and long-term outcomes. This may represent time or a conditional change. So think ABCs, attitude, behavior, and condition. That's what we're wanting to see changes in. It's important to note that not all of the outcomes require an associated performance measure. Again, the logic model is relative to a full theory of change. The program may choose to only measure one of its outputs with one aligned outcome. Usually a short-term or medium-term outcome, and then the longer-term outcomes become relevant for an evaluation or may simply represent an ultimate change in condition established through cause and effect, but aren't within the program's means to measure within a 1-year period. So choose whatever makes the most sense for your program. It all depends on program design, and you're not required to develop performance measures for all outputs and outcomes in the logic model. When all 3 elements are laid out, both in the written theory of change narrative and the logic model snapshot, it should read like a story or blueprint from point A to point B. Alignment through the elements is critical. The reader should be able to look at your theory of change and logic model and envision a day in the life of your program. I have a few points to share on the performance measure and performance measure module. All applicants must include one aligned performance measure with that output and outcome that correspond to the proposed primary intervention. This may be one of those national performance measures, or it could be an applicant determined measure if none of those national performance measures really accurately captures the intervention of your program. Performance measures reflecting activities that are not central to your program model should not be included in your application and do not need to be reported to AmeriCorps, although you might still collect the data for your own purposes or to share as good stories. So if we use that previous logic model example, this is what a program might choose for their performance measure. The output of 400 students served, and of those 400 students, 275 will improve their math score by 10% or greater. A common pitfall we see are really lengthy problem statements, as well as long paragraphs under that described instrument section. The problem statement can be a quick 2 to 3 sentence summary, as the example on the slide demonstrates. Likewise, the described instrument section should be kept as brief as possible while also including enough information for a reviewer to assess. For your outcome performance measures described instrument statement, be sure to identify who is counted. For example, only those who complete the full dosage. Explain the change required between pre and post to be counted, and indicate how this change is significant and meaningful. We have included an example on this slide. The theory of change and evidence narrative is where you capture those more robust details. It's not the performance measure module or the logic model. A little more on evidence. Maikia, I'm sorry, am I skipping this or am I covering this piece too?
You can skip this part.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. So there will be some additional documents required to be submitted along with your application. All applicants will submit the organization's most recent audited financials. This could be a single audit if your organization is subject to a federal single audit requirement, or it could simply be your audited financial statements from a third-party auditor. Submit this in a PDF, or if it's too large, send a link to where it can be found online. That's acceptable too. If you are recompeting for the first time, there should be an evaluation plan, and there's a template for this. If you're recompeting for a subsequent time, your evaluation report for the previous 3 years, as well as a new evaluation plan for the upcoming 3 years, should be submitted as well. And lastly, if applicable, submit a labor union concurrence and/or the Serve Washington waiver, again, if applicable. A list of relevant information can be found in the RFGA. Okay, I'm going to skip this one. Some e-grants tips. When you are completing your application, create these pieces outside of e-grants. E-grants does not allow for fancy formatting. So don't do bolds or italics or bulleted lists or charts, because it won't, e-grants doesn't allow for it. It won't show up in e-grants. If you need to, use spacing or all caps for section headers. And e-grants will automatically double space when you're printing. So if you are creating your pieces in Word double spaced, it'll quadruple space it in e-grants. So pay attention to that. The spacing is not always perfect between Word and e-grants. So if you're being mindful of that 10-page limit, and you've got a Word document that's 10 pages, you'll want to be sure to double check it in e-grants to make sure that it truly is the 10 pages. Then save and validate often once you're in e-grants. And if you use Chrome as your internet browser, that seems to be the one that works best. eGrants was designed under the old Internet Explorer. So the suggestion is to use Chrome if you start to have some challenges with it. Print out your application. After you've got it in eGrants, hit the print button so that you can get it and see how is the formatting, how is the spacing, and are you under that page limit? Read the NOFO and the application, or I'm sorry, the RFGA application instructions and all of the documents on the RFGA page. Read that carefully. Within the eGrants system, please don't use web addresses or URLs. Cite the source in the narrative, but know that the system can't support links. Your numbers, data, and demographic sections should all match in all of the different sections. So if you're going around and playing with your budget, make sure that executive summary gets updated as well. Do a double take to make sure, or a double check to make sure all of the data matches throughout. If you, if you update one section, think, where else might this need to be updated? Be accurate on the face sheet as to who the authorized rep versus program or project director is. The authorized rep is the one that has the signing authority to enter into a contract. Then the project and contract dates, it must be 1 full year and should be on the first of the month through the last day of the month the following year. So it would be, if your grant started in August, it would be August 1st, 2023 through July 31st, 2024. And do note that the contract period, the project period, is not the same as the member service year or the member's term of service. That can be less than 1 year. Another reminder to print this out, print out the application out of eGrants for a final review before you actually submit it, and give yourself an early deadline. The eGrant system has been known to be down or be challenging, and it always feels like it is on those most important deadlines, those due dates. And ask for an impartial reviewer to come and review it. If have somebody who's not familiar with your program design concept to take a look and see if it makes sense to them. Now, for anybody who's on the call who is a recompete applicant, just a couple quick reminders. Make sure that you're increasing the maximum cost per MSY. Make sure that you're increasing the living allowance per the new guidance and requirements. There is new criteria for narrative, so don't just copy and paste from previous years. Make sure that you're updating your data and statistics. And then with the national performance measures, those sometimes change. So even if you're using the same performance measure, make sure you read the current definition and requirement. And then verify the evaluation plan and reporting requirements. Okay. So are you ready for AmeriCorps? If you have questions, be sure to get them into us no later than the March 17th. Get those questions into us early. Applications are due by 5 p.m. on the 17th. Links are here for the readiness assessment and RFGA. You can email all of your questions to servewashington@ofm.wa.gov, or you can come off mute and ask questions or type any questions you may have in the chat box. But with that, that ends the official piece of our new and recompete formula RFGA technical assistance call. So thank you all very much for attending.
Hi there, I have a question.
Hi, Beth. Yeah.
Hi, Jenny, how's it going? So this is like really nitpicky, but I went into the application to see what my questions were before this call, and it has the deadline listed as like January 7th for the title of the application for this that's listed in the PDF. And I just want to make sure that that's still okay to apply for.
Yeah. Now I'm trying to I'm trying to envision my eGrant screens. That would be one of those places where it talks about the NOFO versus RFGA. That's
Okay.
one of those timelines that would apply to us at Serve Washington as the prime, but does not apply to you as a formula sub grantee.
Okay, so it should be fine, is
Yep.
what you're saying. That's what I thought. I sent you a screenshot just in case, but that is great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I am going to go ahead and end the recording. We will have this posted, like I said, on that funding opportunity webpage. And questions can be sent in and shared on an FAQ document, but we will also stick around to answer questions anybody might have.